But I'll talk about Geoffrey Bauer, and the title that I gave, I don't know if it appeared on the Docomomo website, it was something else, which I'll tell you. It was Modernism and Pleasure. And if we think about those front runners in Britain, or the Anglosphere, in which I would include at this time of Geoffrey Bauer, Sri Lanka, there were serious players like the Smithsons who advanced, you might say, theoretical positions in modernism. But modernism as a way of doing architecture spread, and so there were a lot of other, I think, very good architects who were less theoretical, you might say, and much more to do with pleasure. And Bauer certainly was to do with pleasure. I mean, Bauer, I'll explain about him, born in 1919, and he studied English and law, and in 1938 was at St. Catherine's College, Cambridge. And then he became a lawyer, a barrister in London in 1944, so he was 25. And then he left to travel, and I think he was a man of leisure. I mean, he was from that group in Sri Lanka which were called the Burgher class. They were biracial or triracial, so they weren't part of native, you might say, Sri Lanka, and they weren't part of the English establishment in Sri Lanka. And at that time, what I sensed, having been there, was that at the time that Bauer was practicing, it was very bohemian. There was a bohemian set of Australian artists, women architects, and very obviously a small group of people who were not only outside society through their race, but through their inclinations. But Bauer, having decided that he wasn't going to settle in Italy and live a life of leisure, came back to Sri Lanka in 1948, and he bought an abandoned rubber estate at Lunaganga, which I'll show you. And he planned to create an Italian garden from a tropical wilderness, but then he discovered he didn't know enough. He didn't have any technical skills. So he became an apprentice in a Colombo architectural practice called Edwards, Reed and Begg. So it was an Anglo practice. In 1951, aged 32. And then in 1952, having discovered that he still didn't know enough about architecture, he came back to England and spent a year at Cambridge, and then enrolled at the Architectural Association, where I imagine, having been a graduate at the Architectural Association, he learnt nothing about being an architect. And in 1957, at the age of 38, he came back to Sri Lanka, and he took over what the remnants of the practice of Edward Rees and Begg. And then he effectively, it became his practice. And he was clearly a man of social scope. I mean, he wasn't poor. I don't think he had to work. So the pleasures were, he knew what pleasure was. And he started with a house in Colombo, which he built for 38 years. Actually, the question I wanted to put was he a modernist? Well, he was a modernist because in the time of his development as an architect and in his practice, that's what architecture was. So architecture was a modernism. So the house in Colombo, you'll see, if I can find my pointer, which I can't, I'll have to examine. On the left, you'll see the ground floor, and then on the right, there's the floor above, and then the top floor, which is actually a terrace. So it's a hardly understandable building because it was an accumulation of buildings. He bought one after another, and then he joined them together. And I'm going to talk about Bauer not in a scholarly fashion, but I'll talk about Bauer as one architect talks about the work of another. So you arrive at this house, and of course it's rather blank to the street, and there are a couple of rather beautiful garage doors, and then inside a Rolls Royce. Inside, he was a great car collector, and there's also, I mean, the car was part of the interior very beautifully, and he collected other cars, some which I don't have photographs of, but off the garage there's you can see there's a recess with seats and then top lights. So through this house, which of course had no side windows, he created courtyards and roof lights. And he collected remnants of existing buildings and put them in. So it was rather a collage. But, you know, in a way, modernism in Corbusier's time was not completely immune to architecture of the past, not by any means. But once you go in from the garage, and everything's painted kind of shiny white in the most beautiful way, and there's always light at the end of the tunnel. And this dot will show you where you are in the next slide. So here's an open courtyard within the corridor, which is just a light source and a place for plants. And then further along on the other side, there's another recess. So his way of bringing light in is very, very charming. And he has a decorator. He has an interiorist sensibility, and that's not just apparent in this building. In the buildings per se that I'll show you, he has that sense of a very good interior decorator. So I'll just show you. And there's a table with a chair, and you can notice on the table there's a print, perhaps you can't see it, but there's a print of a leaf. And then a door. This was a door painted by an Australian architect whose name I've forgotten to memorize, who was, as I say, part of the Bohemian Circle in Colombo at the time. And then another art object and a courtyard. It's, in a way, it's not open to architectural explanation. That's why I'm showing image after image. It's completely experiential and a sort of mystery. You can't really, it's a house that somebody made for themselves and they understand themselves. So there's a courtyard in the middle, and then there's some water in the courtyard, and then a garden at the back with trees. And we will see that the trees in his work, as we'll see at Lunaganga, are very beautifully understood. Their shape is very beautifully understood. And then the room above is this very elegant room, a sitting room. You can rent this house, apparently, which is I'd like to do one time. And then more. And this is the door to the staircase. And going up to the roof, the denouement of the building is really in the roof, and you approach it slowly, and it has great scenography. One view opens after another, and here we see what it's like. And then there's this an external kitchen. Wait for it. It's really splendid. I mean, really, really beautiful, and not prey to the modernist dictums of abstraction. You know, that's what I find so pleasing and so current about Barwar, is that he can incorporate, you might say, sentimental objects, things that we would like, within a framework which is progressive. That's the thing here, that he's a modernist because he's a progressive. And the colours are very important. He has a wonderful sense of colour. This is black, but it's a very particular black. It's a black that somebody who's a painter would make. But we'll look at the he did hotels. He did a lot of hotels, of which I've only visited 2. Bentota, I visited. The next one I'll show you, I actually stayed in. But the pleasure here is you approach into that yard that you see by taxi, and then you come into this space, which is underground, and you enter on the staircase we see on the right, up the stair, and then you find yourself, you'll see on the right-hand side, the pool. But a really pleasing reception with a painted ceiling and structure in places that it needs to be, so there's a certain dynamic and almost, you might say, a vernacular quality to it. And then the pool, which, if I'm correct, isn't a swimming pool, it's just a pool in the middle of the hotel with islands of plants in it. It's just a pool to sit around. And then the hotel rooms are entered from the outside. I mean, it's all of the hotels he made the plans are extraordinarily uneconomic. You know, a hotel is a central corridor and rooms either side, but that's not what this or any of his hotels are about. And then a bar, a sort of colonnade next to the bar, with places to sit which have tables made of concrete with leaves pressed into them. And throughout the work there's this naturalness, this simple series of artistic gestures which give it enormous pleasure. And then you go into the bar and it's darker, and it's everything a bar should be. It's away from the view, it's snug, it's full of dark furniture. And then, of course, across the top you see the water of the pool in the centre. Kandalama is extraordinary because it's a very long drive into the jungle, and you come upon it. It's indescribably exotic because it's just covered in. It's intentionally covered in planting, and they have a monkey community which. When I went there, the monkeys had become very restrained. I don't know what they'd done. Maybe they're giving them largactyl or something. But a friend of mine who went there on his honeymoon, a colleague, in fact, left the window open, and the monkeys stole his underwear. So, you know, there are signs saying, you know, just be very careful of the monkeys. But we didn't have any monkey problems. But you can see the plan is. The white area is a lake, a huge lake, and then the back of it is a mountain, and then the snaking object is the hotel. So you arrive by taxi, and this is the reception. It doesn't have any doors on it. It's full of rather charming people who come up to you. Very polished floor, and a rock in it, you know. So you go around the rock to your room. So there's this wonderful. It's not like any other hotel, really. It's all pleasurable. And then when you go to your room, you go along a corridor like this, and yes. So there are moments when it opens up, and there's place to sit. So the corridor is a way to get out of your room, but not have to be sociable. And the corridor is also a place to enjoy the proximity of the landscape. And also, I don't know if you can see it here, there's an animal inscribed into the concrete. Yeah. Close up of the animal. And then at certain moments the balustrade changes, and he's, I think, intensely aware of the way that the landscape in front would frame the lake. So there's tremendous understanding, which we'll see brought to a conclusion in the garden that he made. And then a staircase, and each staircase is different. This one's massive, next to a rock, so you could see that his detailing was very much to do with the situation. And then this one, a real look no hands thing, where you, would you want to go up it? Where you would. I mean, it's hung from something up there, some mysterious place up there. And then, of course, there are restaurants which look out onto the surroundings, and then spaces outside the restaurant. So there's this, unlike most hotels, there's just each, you might say, facility, each corridor, each bedroom has an impact. It's an actual place, an architectural place. And this is what a room is like. I mean, full of rich wood, and you come in and there's a shower which, oops, I'll just go forward again, a shower which looks out over the balcony so that the monkeys can steal your towel. And then you become aware that there are roof terraces which, and we'll see that underneath it's a bar that looks out over the swimming pool, and above it's something you experience as a landscape. So when you're in that green space, it seems to be part of the natural landscape, but it's not. And so the lake is kept from you. This is a landscape tradition that the English landscapers did, where they have a major event and they keep it from the viewer, and then they deliver it and then they take it away. But the swimming pools are a sort of miracle because it's an infinity pool, and we all know that now. That's become a cliche, but I think when this happened, the invitation was for you to swim, thinking of yourself able to swim out into the water, which is actually several meters below. And it's an illusion, like all good illusions. And then there are places which, in a way, are purposeless. They're just to walk around the landscape. And some of that landscape is a roof. And there's real delicacy of how the metalwork is put into the landscape. And sometimes the pools are strange shapes. There's a pool by Alvaro Siza on the beach at Lesa de Palmira, which is it's mostly rectangular. And Siza, who has extraordinary abilities too, has created a space where the immediate places where people jump in. Around it, there's a footpath, but it's so large that people promenade in it. And then the serious swimmers are out towards the edge, near the sea, where the waves break over them. There isn't this kind of drama, but there's another a sort of illusory or illusionistic drama. But then, like all illusions, you find that, of course, it's constructed. I mean, from here, it's moments of real ambiguity about where the water stops and where the lake begins. And sometimes the balustrade changes, to here I suppose it drops, so the mountain is framed, and then it rises up where there isn't that view. That's something that Caesar does in another swimming pool. They're surrounded by walls, and it opens to show a view. Sometimes it closes to give privacy. Sometimes it's hired just to provide another type of space, but given by this simplest of means. But this is about real artistic ability and artistic intent. So the metalwork is very carefully chosen. We know, looking around the city, how good metalwork is very rare, how a very great architect like Barwa would understand what would be viewed behind the metalwork, and without being imitative, would make a composition that was an architectural composition, but which worked with the trees in combination. But Dunaganga is really the great place because it's well, it has mainly buildings that existed there, which he's altered, but principally it's a garden. So let's see if I can. I mean, this is rather difficult to look at. It has is an enormous lake, I think. No, it's a hill. Sorry. I can't read my plan. I'll show you the pictures. But you arrive, and there's a series of open-sided buildings, including this one, which we'll approach. And you notice how the paving is diamond pattern, and the flooring inside is diamond pattern. And there was a strong Dutch influence in Sri Lanka, which is somehow embodied in this building, which I think Barwa added to it, but didn't alter fundamentally. He distilled its character and made it say something. And there's clearly an addition, and it's rather difficult to know which is an addition and what's original. But then you leave, and there's a terrace of gravel and a seat. And Barwa, this garden was just for Barwa. It wasn't for anybody else. Maybe there were guests, but Barwa would sit in different places in the landscape, and depending on the time of day, he would ring that bell, which is a gong, or another bell. And depending on the sound of the bell, he would either get tea or gin and tonic. I mean, it's completely sort of unimaginable lifestyle. But what I'm going to try and explain this, that two staircases, one very large at the bottom, one smaller, and the ground between it is understood, let's say, and the stairs are understood, and the trees are understood as part of an overall composition, like a painter. And then you come upon water, which you quite often do in this landscape. And then from that water side, you see this extraordinary building going up a hill, which I think was an original building, and yet, as in the earlier building I showed, it's been modified by Barwa, and so that's the inside, taken through the glass. So you walk down there, and then you leave it behind, and you find the landscape again. And he understood, like all great landscape designers, like the Japanese landscape design that I saw in Kyoto, he understood that the reflection of the sky would be part of the composition. It wasn't neutral. He understood all of the three-dimensional possibilities of the elements that you put into landscape. And also how the surface of water would be modified, not just by light, but what you see underneath it, as you can see here, and the plants that would grow on top of it. So the water has several layers of artistic management, you might say. And the sky, the clouds are part of this composition. And Barwa worked by eye, as I hear it. He would do things and then he would modify them, and he would have people moving plants. So it wasn't by accident. This is highly considered, but in a very naturalistic way. I'll just go back. For me, the darkness of the trees on the left, and then the bright area of sky with the white tree reflected in it, has potent as any painting, in my view. And also, just a lawn of low grass with the trees massed at the left, and then these line of white trees against it. And the way that they're heaped, the root is heaped. And then the trees fall away on the left here. So the spatial effect of the landscape keeps changing as you walk through it. And then there are what appear to be rice fields. I'm sure they're not, but they're watered landscape. And then just a corner of water, which has a very different quality through the way that the trees around it make it dark. And then two elements of water, a pond with leaves on it, as we've seen, and then on the right-hand side, a field of, I can't remember what it was, and then leading you on these very big paving slabs in the landscape, which are so big you can't step from one to the other. And then a tiny moment where a pond has this unpond-like shape, and as I say, the light quality is very different through the way that he's planted it and allowed trees to shade it. And then you find this. This is the end, in a way, of the whole experience. This lake, and then more. And he understood how the trees and the shape of the trees and the figure in the ground and the water that you see at the back would all be a vital composition. Or you would see white trees through green foliage. Or you'd approach lower and you'd see a hill, and on the right-hand side up the hill, behind the white trees, is another building. Another building which I think was, you may say, as found. I mean, sometimes the images would just talk for themselves, I think. They don't need any explanation. And here, as I remember it, there's this large slope on the horizon. And then, as you come to the top of it, you see the lake, and it's completely unexpected. And we all know from any park that we like, where there are self-seeded trees, there are moments like this in the park which are innocent, where space gets smaller. And these are the kind of spaces that are part of people's memory, or experience, in which they, if they have any sensitivity, they're part of their personal visual world. Or something like this, where you walk under a tree and the surface of the green is like a carpet. I'm finishing. It's been a very short lecture. It has been a very short lecture, but there's a very, very good book on Barwood, which is affordable. It has all of the work in it, and it's worth buying if it's still in print. Thank you.
Would anyone like to question, contribution of any type?
Thank you very much. Is that audible? Yeah. I was just like to say a couple of complimentary things. I mean, not compliment as in a compliment, flattering, as complimentary as... Sorry, to say something that sort of just moves things in a slightly different direction, because Bawa, because of his age, and as you said, how late he came to the practice, he relied on a lot of people around him. Yeah. So you mentioned this sort of bohemian group, but key is Bevis Bawa, who was 2 years older, his brother, who had this even more magnificent garden at slightly higher altitude in Sri Lanka, and figures like Barbara Sansoni, Laki Senanayake, who drew an awful lot of the traditional buildings and documented them, because you've noticed the found traditional elements, columns, and so on. And he himself wasn't a good draftsman. In fact, he drew really ugly drawings with a ballpoint pen, except that you could scale them and measure off, and it'd be an amazing space when it was built. But so just to mention those contributors, and then I think the other thing that I thought was, well, it's interesting that if you can't draw as an architect, you can take solace from Bawa, because he really couldn't draw. Yeah, the beautiful plans you saw were by someone called Laki Senanayake, who's one of these, he worked with batik and sculpture and painting, very multi-talented. And then I just think I just had something else I wanted to say. Oh, when you talk about pleasure, I think that's absolutely accurate. But there's also a very important stimulant for someone like Bawa going back to Sri Lanka at that time, which is actually the avoidance of anti-pleasure. Because he was initially bringing back modernist architecture he learnt at the Architectural Association into the context of Colombo, where there were power strikes every few hours, if not a few days for sure, and the elevators didn't work, and the solar gain was incredible in any building, with steel and concrete and glass. So he was very impelled to go back to and learn from the traditional architecture of Sri Lanka. So though he didn't draw it himself, he knew all the stuff being produced by Laki Senanayake and Barbara Sansoni. So I think the one word that I was surprised you didn't mention was the word tradition. Yep. And I thought it's sort of, there's a lovely irony in the sense that the progressive element you noticed in Bawa, absolutely correct, and so it's very non-doctrinaire and non-abstract, is actually the contribution really is learning from tradition that he could absorb without any sort of dogmatic or polemical prejudice. So, sorry for the long, not
the
question.
real great nature of Docomomo is that when you speak, there are other audience members who know other things about the subject you've spoken on. And that's its real value as a learned society. It's not simply a place where you come and be lectured at. So thank you very much for that contribution. I think one thing I'd say is that certain types of vernacular architecture, which have been made and copied, tend to be abstract. And that, in a way, makes them compatible with ideas of modernism, which also stressed abstraction. But I can't match your knowledge, and I thank you for your contribution. And if there are others, I'd be very pleased to hear them.
Mine is a question, which is, are the buildings all still there? Because after all the political upheavals and the weather upheavals that have taken place in Sri Lanka, have they survived?
I can't answer that. I mean, I went there probably 10 years ago, and I can't say whether they still are.
I can say still there, most of it. I was going to say, I really enjoyed your lecture. Thank you. I've actually got a house in Sri Lanka built by Geoffrey Bawa. But I was going to say that Bawa was actually very fearless. He was one of the first people in the sort of the artistic circles to come out and say he was gay.
Yes, yeah.
So I think that's we should celebrate about in the 40s and even before. So yeah.
When I was there, I said, "Was there a Mrs. Bawa?" And they said, No, there was no Mrs. Bauer. And I think that's as far as I needed to know about Geoffrey's attention.
Can I ask you, what's it like to live in one of his houses?
Oh, it's actually, I'll tell you. It's called Southern Soul Villas in near Hikkaduwa, and it's built around a mango tree. So during the mango season, all the monkeys come into your front room. It's actually quite scary. I'm not a big animal fan, but all the monkeys, because they come down to your front room to just have the mangoes, and it's like inside out. What he believed in. If you're inside, you should feel what it's like when you're outside, and if you're outside, you should feel what it's like being inside. So it's completely, the whole house is glass actually,
Oh, really?
and it's 3/4 surrounded by a lagoon, and with an infinity pool. Actually, that was the other thing, because Bawa actually invented the infinity pool. So the eye line goes from your front room to the pool, to the water, to the sea.
Wow. And what type of mango?
Oh, I actually don't know, because there's like 4 or 5 different types of mangoes, but it's actually the season is now, so there'll be lots of monkeys in our front room.
One of the things that struck me was the quality of craftsmanship in the construction, and I wonder how closely Bauer worked with the people. Were these Sri Lankan builders and contractors he was using?
I don't know, but I'm sure they were. I mean, I don't think. I think there's a definite feeling from me actually that they wouldn't be European constructors. I think that the social structures in. Sorry, is somebody answering that question? Did you? But I wouldn't have thought the social structure meant that you had European builders. I think there was a clear distinction between people who said what would be done and then people who made things happen. So I would think it was builders with traditional skills.
Sorry, just but on that particular point, definitely a lot of local people, and it has really encouraged all of the local people and his sets, these other people. But when it came to the Parliament, which is a big building, that was actually built by Japanese contractors. And
Really, which building was that? Sorry.
The Parliament, the Parliament in Colombo is. Just outside Colombo. Yes, I mean it's a big project and quite rational. So with all of the kind of the lovely incidental, as you said, impossible to describe, but just experience of the first house in particular. The Parliament building is really quite rational, but the contractors there, the government, I think, were insisted on a Japanese contractor. And there were these lovely scenes that I was able to witness in his office of Bauer, had quite a big, how should I say, what's the word when you have a ship and it goes through the water? Has a, it has, and there were these, I mean, I don't say anything sort of, comments on people's nationalities, but the Japanese people were way smaller and small, and they would sort of be like, it was like a mum goose and the little, gooselings or whatever they are, goslings. So it was very funny scenes because he would sort of have them ready, wrapped around his finger, and still manage to, with things like the timber, huge rafters scaled up to be just the eaves detail would be sort of arm span, and he would have them all profiled out and say 10 or so different kinds, and he would be then determining which of them was going to work best. So it's a funny mixture between sort of big contractor and the local people.
This is a very serious suggestion. It's not a challenge. We should really have a Bauer lecture too, which you could give. No, what you're saying is very, very fascinating. And no, really, if you've thought about it, the lecture program's still open, and I'm not being facetious. I think it would be very interesting. I could come into the audience and you could talk more sensibly and with more detail than I have, but But do think about it, seriously.
Very sweet.
I didn't hear that, but I'm interpreting it as yes.
Sounded like a yes.
That would be good,
Just a
actually.
little, I would actually love to know if there's anyone else here who's ever worked for Bauer, because
Did you
I-
work with Bauer?
yes, but only as a student. I mean, as literally, I was
This
just
is gold dust, really.
think-
I mean,
I
so
think
this
I
is-
was quite a
Docomomo is
pretty
very
young boy.
open to this kind of
So,
thing.
then I think Jeffrey was a bit disappointed. But anyway, it was way back, and then since I haven't actually ever studied it. I mean, I know about things like Greek and Roman architecture and Renaissance stuff, so I'm completely. I'd have trouble. Would do a duo.
I didn't hear the last disclaimer. I just heard that you'd worked with Bauer. This is my cutoff was at that point. I really think if you have material, there would be a great lecture. Can we talk after? I would hope to.
I think first I go and eat mangoes. we go to eat mangoes, and then we develop.
Well, I'm hoping Tom's providing Sri Lankan snacks, which he suggested might happen. But it is the resort, so there may even be some mangoes. Hello.
Plenty of Sri Lankan snacks, so please do have them.
That's very nice, yeah. Well, I heard that, but I just saw some monkeys making off with the food, so. Are there any other great contributions like this?
My name is Michael Harris. My mother was born in Kandy and my father worked as a planter. So I have some Sri Lankan heritage, although I've only visited rather than lived there. But I have a collection of Dutch chests, and I can vouch for the quality of the cabinetry and the brass work that's on those chests. And certainly the skill of the local building workers and carpenters will be very high and is preserved even on recent visits.
Good to know.
And the other thing is the monkeys in Candelama know where everyone keeps all their medicines, because that's the first thing they break into. And they steal they're very partial to malaria and to ibuprofen.
Really? They were very docile when I was there. I looked at them and sort of challenged them
They
to
trash
make
the
a
rules.
move, but they were I think they hadn't been taking ibuprofen. I think they'd been drugged because they weren't really doing much. They weren't doing much stealing.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, it looks like Sri Lankan snacks.
Thank you very much.